The polished marble floor reflected 1,000 points of golden light as a crystal chandelier trembled almost imperceptibly above the grand lobby, and at precisely 6:30 in the morning, a man in a gray maintenance uniform knelt beside a brass ventilation grate with a screwdriver in his hand while the city beyond the glass walls slowly awakened under a blanket of pale winter fog. Nobody entering that building would have noticed him twice. Yet if any of them had known what he once was, and what he had willingly abandoned, they would have looked at him very differently. The building stood 47 stories high in the financial district, a monument to wealth and ambition. Its glass skin mirrored the skyline, and its lobby smelled faintly of polished stone, expensive perfume, and fresh coffee delivered before dawn. Elias Carter worked there every day. At 58 years old, he carried himself with the relaxed posture of a man who no longer felt compelled to prove anything. His dark gray hair showed threads of silver at the temples. Deep lines marked the corners of his eyes, not from bitterness but from years spent smiling through hardship. His uniform was immaculate. Always. The name patch sewn above his pocket had begun to fade from repeated washing, but every crease remained sharp. A young security guard walked through the lobby carrying a paper cup. "Morning, Mr. Carter." Elias glanced up and smiled. "Morning, Ben." The guard hesitated. "My son passed his math exam." Elias's expression brightened. "That's good news. He says the study method you showed him helped." Elias stood slowly and adjusted the vent cover. "Your son did the work. Give him the credit." The guard laughed. "Still, thank you?" Elias simply nodded. People often thanked him for things that had nothing to do with maintenance. He helped employees with college applications. He tutored children. He fixed problems nobody else had time to solve. And then he quietly returned to work. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as he pushed his maintenance cart toward the service elevator. The rubber wheels rolled across the polished floor with a gentle squeak. Invisible. That was how most people saw him. And for years he had been perfectly content with that. His phone vibrated. A text message appeared. "Good luck today, Dad?" He smiled immediately. Emma. His daughter. His entire world. He typed back. "You don't need luck. You just need to be yourself." 3 dots appeared. Then her reply. "I'm nervous." His smile softened. "That means you care. You'll be fine." The truth was that he was nervous too. Not because of her. Because of the family she was marrying into. The Ashfords. One of the wealthiest families in the country. Owners of a vast real estate empire. The kind of people whose names appeared on buildings. The kind of people who never noticed maintenance workers. Especially not maintenance workers who would soon become relatives. A cold knot settled briefly in his stomach. Then he pushed it aside. Emma was happy. That was enough. For 26 years, every decision Elias made had begun and ended with that simple principle. Emma first. Everything else second. The morning passed in quiet routines. Repairing a faulty sensor. Replacing damaged ceiling tiles. Inspecting mechanical systems. The work required patience. Precision. Attention. Qualities Elias possessed in abundance. At noon he sat alone in a break room overlooking the city. Gray clouds drifted between skyscrapers. Rain tapped softly against the glass. He opened a small lunch container. Turkey sandwich. Apple slices. Nothing elaborate. The same meal he packed for himself 3 days a week. His eyes drifted toward the skyline. A memory stirred. A boardroom. A billion-dollar negotiation. His name spoken by powerful people. Then another memory replaced it. Emma at 8 years old, sleeping in a hospital chair beside her mother's bed. His jaw tightened. The past remained where it belonged. Behind him. Or so he believed. That evening, the Ashford estate glowed beneath hundreds of decorative lights. Luxury cars lined the curved driveway. Valets hurried through the cold air. Music floated from inside the mansion. The celebration had been organized after Emma's wedding ceremony, a gathering of investors, executives, political figures, and family friends. A showcase of wealth. Elias arrived in a dark suit he rarely wore. It fit perfectly despite its age. The fabric was modest compared to the designer clothing surrounding him, but he wore it with quiet confidence. Inside, crystal glasses chimed softly. Champagne sparkled beneath golden lights. Laughter echoed through enormous rooms. Elias immediately felt dozens of curious eyes evaluating him. Not hostile. Merely dismissive. People categorized each other quickly in environments like this. And Elias clearly did not belong. Emma approached through the crowd. Her white dress shimmered beneath the chandeliers. When she hugged him, her nervousness disappeared. For a moment, she was simply his daughter again. "Dad? You look happy." "I am." He smiled. "Then that's all that matters." A voice interrupted. "Emma." Victor Ashford approached surrounded by executives. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Perfectly groomed. The confidence of a billionaire radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He looked at Emma first. Then at Elias. His smile cooled noticeably. "Your father finally arrived." The sentence sounded polite. The tone did not. Emma sensed it immediately. "So glad you could come," Victor continued. Elias extended a hand. Victor shook it briefly. The gesture felt more like an obligation than a greeting. Several nearby guests watched carefully. Victor's eyes settled on Elias. "And what exactly do you do, Mr. Carter?" Emma stiffened. She knew that question. The answer always changed people's behavior. Elias remained calm. "I'm a maintenance supervisor." Silence. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But real. Victor blinked once. Then twice. The corners of his mouth tightened. "A maintenance supervisor." He repeated it as though testing unfamiliar words. Several executives exchanged glances. Emma's cheeks reddened. Elias saw it. His heart hurt for her. Not for himself. Never for himself. For her. Victor laughed softly. "Interesting." The surrounding crowd grew quieter. A subtle circle formed. The social instinct of spectators sensing tension. Victor lifted his champagne glass. "Well, that's certainly an unusual background for the newest member of the Ashford family." Emma spoke immediately. "Victor." But he continued. "We've had senators at these events." Polite laughter emerged. "We've had ambassadors." More laughter. Victor smiled wider. "But this might be the first time we've hosted building maintenance." The laughter grew louder. Emma looked devastated. Elias remained motionless. The room felt colder. The music seemed farther away. Victor took another sip. "No offense, of course." The cruelest insults often arrived wrapped in politeness. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Dad doesn't deserve this." Victor shrugged. "I'm simply acknowledging reality." His gaze swept across the audience. "Families usually build upward." More scattered laughter. "This is certainly a unique direction." The humiliation landed exactly where he intended. Public. Personal. Memorable. Elias looked at his daughter. She appeared smaller somehow. As though years of hard-earned confidence had suddenly been challenged. And in that moment, something old awakened behind his calm eyes. Not anger. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. A tiny gesture. Almost invisible. Then he spoke. His voice remained perfectly steady. "Emma." She looked at him. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about." The room fell unexpectedly silent. Not because of volume. Because of certainty. Elias continued. "Work has dignity." No one moved. No one laughed. "Any work done honestly." Victor's smile faded slightly. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. Only for a second. Then it vanished. The moment passed. The crowd slowly resumed conversation. Music returned. Glasses clinked. Yet something had changed. because several people were now looking at Elias differently, as though they had briefly seen something hidden beneath the uniform. Something difficult to explain. Later that night, long after the celebration ended, Victor Ashford sat alone in his study reviewing guest information. One detail caught his attention. He frowned. Then checked again. The maintenance supervisor's educational records did not make sense. Neither did several unexplained gaps in his history. Victor stared at the screen. The first crack of curiosity appeared. Who exactly was Emma Carter's father? And why did it feel as though the answer had been waiting in the shadows for a very long time? Cold rain streaked down the 47th floor windows of Ashford Global Headquarters, turning the city beyond into a blurred watercolor of steel, glass, and pale gray light. Inside the Executive Conference Center, the temperature remained perfectly controlled, the carpets absorbed every footstep, and a dozen senior executives sat around a polished walnut table worth more than most people's annual salaries. Yet despite the luxury surrounding them, panic was beginning to spread through the room. The problem had arrived at 8:14 that morning. By 8:45, it threatened to become a disaster. Victor Ashford stood at the head of the table staring at a projection screen covered in charts, legal notices, and flashing warnings. No one spoke. The silence felt strained. Uncomfortable. Expensive. A massive international redevelopment project, one of the largest investments in Ashford Global's history, had suddenly collapsed into uncertainty. 3 banks had suspended financing. A regulatory review had been triggered. Investors were demanding answers. The project represented billions. Failure would shake the entire company. Victor turned toward the executives. "Explain it to me again." The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "We believe the compliance issue originated within the infrastructure assessment package." "Believe?" Victor's voice sharpened. The man swallowed. "We are still investigating." Victor looked around the room. No answers. Only uncertainty. His irritation deepened. For a man accustomed to controlling outcomes, uncertainty felt like an insult. Outside the conference room, life continued normally. Employees hurried through hallways. Phones rang. Elevators moved. And several floors below, Elias Carter was replacing a damaged electrical relay in a mechanical equipment room. The smell of machine oil mixed with cold metal. A ventilation fan hummed steadily overhead. His radio crackled. A request came through. Executive Conference Center. Immediate maintenance assistance required. Elias wiped his hands with a cloth and headed upstairs. 5 minutes later, he entered the executive floor carrying a compact toolkit. The atmosphere felt different immediately. Tense. Compressed. Like air before a thunderstorm. A nervous assistant hurried toward him. "There's a display system malfunction in conference room A." Elias nodded. "I'll take a look." When he entered the room, nobody paid attention to him. Exactly as usual. Executives remained focused on their crisis. Victor barely glanced in his direction. To them, he was part of the furniture. A maintenance worker fixing equipment. Nothing more. Elias approached the presentation console. The screen flickered intermittently. He knelt beside the system. Opened a panel. Began checking connections. While he worked, he listened. Years of experience had taught him that people revealed far more than they intended when they assumed nobody important was listening. The executives continued discussing the crisis. Reports. Approvals. Infrastructure certifications. Risk assessments. Elias's hands slowed slightly. Then stopped. Something felt wrong. Not the display system. The discussion. A phrase repeated twice. Then a number. Then a date. His eyes narrowed. The pieces began fitting together. The mistake was obvious. Painfully obvious. Yet nobody around the table had noticed. He continued listening. 5 more minutes passed. Victor rubbed his temples. Enough. Everyone became still. "We need solutions." Nobody responded. The silence stretched. Heavy. Embarrassing. Then a calm voice spoke from beside the wall. The problem isn't the compliance report. Every head turned. Elias remained kneeling beside the display console. For a moment, nobody seemed to understand what had happened. Victor stared. What? Elias stood slowly. His expression remained respectful. The compliance report isn't the source of the problem. Several executives exchanged irritated looks. One of them laughed softly. Victor folded his arms. And how would you know that? The room expected Elias to retreat, to apologize, to remember his place. Instead, he calmly looked toward the projection screen. The regulatory review was triggered by the Transportation Corridor Amendment submitted last quarter. Silence. A few executives frowned. Elias continued. The amendment altered environmental impact assumptions without adjusting the supporting infrastructure projections. The CFO blinked. Victor's expression hardened. Elias walked toward the screen. Not confidently. Not arrogantly. Simply as a man following logic. The banks didn't react to compliance risk. He pointed toward a document. They reacted to forecast inconsistency. Nobody interrupted. The numbers here. Another document. And here. A third. They contradict each other. The room grew very still. One executive quickly opened a laptop. Another began reviewing files. Victor said nothing. Elias continued. The contradiction creates liability exposure. The CFO suddenly leaned forward. His face changed. Then another executive. Then another. The realization spread visibly. Like dominoes falling. One by one. The room went silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that arrives when certainty collapses. The CFO typed furiously. Seconds later he looked up. His voice sounded strained. He's right. Nobody moved. Victor stared at him. The CFO nodded slowly. He's absolutely right. Another executive checked the same documents. Then another. Confirmation followed confirmation. The mistake had been hidden in plain sight. Missed by highly paid specialists. Caught by a maintenance supervisor. The silence deepened. Even the rain against the windows seemed louder. Victor studied Elias carefully. For the first time, he wasn't seeing a maintenance worker. He was seeing a question. A very troubling question. Where did you learn that? Elias paused. Only briefly. Then he answered. I read. A few executives almost laughed. But nobody actually did. Because the explanation clearly wasn't enough. Not even close. Victor stepped forward. Those documents aren't public. Elias met his gaze. They were displayed on the screen. The answer was technically true. Which made it impossible to challenge. Victor disliked that. Very much. The crisis team immediately shifted direction. Within an hour, they identified the exact issue Elias had described. By noon, corrective actions were underway. The deal was no longer collapsing. The disaster had been avoided. And every executive in the building knew who had identified the solution. Words spread quickly. Stories always do. Especially unexpected ones. By afternoon, people who had ignored Elias for years suddenly watched him differently. Questions followed him through hallways. Whispers trailed behind conversations. The maintenance supervisor who outperformed corporate experts. The maintenance supervisor who understood billion-dollar infrastructure deals. The maintenance supervisor who didn't seem surprised by either fact. Elias ignored the attention. He replaced air filters. Inspected equipment. Completed work orders. Nothing changed. At least externally. Internally, however, old instincts had begun awakening. Instincts he had spent decades burying. That evening, Victor sat alone in his office. The city glowed beneath the darkening sky. Rain continued tapping against the glass. His desk contained a growing file. Elias Carter. Employment history. Educational records. Old photographs. Archived business documents. Pieces. Fragments. Contradictions. Victor stared at a grainy image dated nearly 30 years earlier. A younger Elias stood beside several executives outside a corporate headquarters. The photograph had been difficult to locate. Almost as though someone wanted it forgotten. Victor leaned closer. His heartbeat slowed. Then quickened. Recognition arrived. Not complete recognition. Just enough. A name. A company. A memory. His eyes widened slightly. No. He immediately searched further. The results appeared slowly. Incomplete. Scattered. But increasingly disturbing. Because the maintenance supervisor seemed connected to circles of power far beyond anything Victor had imagined. And if Victor was correct, then the man he humiliated at his son's wedding had once possessed influence rivaling his own. Across the city, Elias sat alone in a modest apartment. The smell of coffee lingered in the kitchen. Emma sat across from him. Concern clouded her expression. You knew that would attract attention. Elias nodded. Yes. Then why do it? He looked toward the window. Rain slid down the glass. Beyond it, city lights shimmered in the darkness. Finally, he answered. Because sometimes remaining silent costs more than speaking. Emma studied him. The answer felt bigger than the moment. Bigger than the company. Bigger than the crisis. As though it belonged to a story she still didn't fully know. A story her father had carried alone for many years. And far across the city, Victor Ashford continued digging into that story. Because for the first time in a very long time, he was afraid he might have underestimated the wrong man. A bitter wind swept between the towers of the financial district, rattling loose rainwater from steel ledges and scattering it across the sidewalks below. The morning sky hung low and colorless above the city, and inside Ashford Global Headquarters, the usual confidence that filled the executive floors had been replaced by something colder. Suspicion. Rumors moved faster than elevators. They drifted through hallways, crossed departments, and slipped beneath office doors. People were talking about Elias Carter, the maintenance supervisor, the man who had solved a billion-dollar crisis, the man who clearly knew far more than he should. For most employees, the mystery was fascinating. For Victor Ashford, it had become personal. He stood inside his private office overlooking the city, a thick file spread across his desk. Every page revealed another contradiction. Every document raised another question. The story Elias had presented to the world did not fit together cleanly. A maintenance worker. A single father. A quiet life. Yet hidden beneath that ordinary surface were traces of something much larger. University records from elite institutions. Old corporate filings. International travel records. Photographs. Mentions buried deep inside archived business publications. Victor stared at one yellowed article. The image showed a younger Elias standing beside executives and investors. His name appeared in the caption. Not prominently, but unmistakably. Victor's jaw tightened. A man did not simply walk away from that kind of world. Not voluntarily. Not without a reason. And Victor intended to find that reason. No matter what it cost. Across town, Elias sat in a small diner near the river. The scent of coffee filled the air. A waitress carried plates between booths while soft jazz drifted from an aging speaker near the counter. Emma sat opposite him. Her wedding ring caught the morning light. She looked tired. The last few weeks had placed her between two worlds. Her father's. And the Ashfords'. Neither seemed willing to leave the other alone. You should tell me. Elias looked up. Tell you what? The truth. Her voice softened. The whole truth. He knew this conversation had been coming. For years. Maybe decades. Yet hearing the words still felt heavier than expected. He wrapped his hands around a coffee mug. Warm ceramic. Steadying. Comforting. What makes you think I haven't? Emma offered a sad smile. Because every time people ask about your past, you answer the question they asked. She paused. But never the one they're really asking. Elias looked away. Outside, gray water moved slowly beneath the bridge. For a moment he saw another river. Another city. Another life. A life he had buried long ago. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. A company number. Unexpected. He answered. The voice on the other end sounded nervous. Very nervous. Mr. Carter. Human Resources needs to see you immediately. Elias already knew. The storm had arrived. The conference room felt colder than necessary. Fluorescent lights cast sharp reflections across the polished table. 3 executives waited inside. Human Resources. Corporate Legal. Internal Compliance. Victor was not present. But his influence filled the room anyway. A stack of documents sat before them. One executive cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, concerns have been raised regarding omissions in your employment disclosures. Elias sat quietly. Another executive slid a folder toward him. Can you explain these records? He opened it. Old photographs. Corporate archives. Business registrations. Pieces of a life he had spent decades trying to leave behind. The executive continued. You never disclosed these affiliations. Elias closed the folder. No one asked? The answer irritated them immediately. Because it was true. Technically. Legally. Completely true. Yet truth and comfort rarely traveled together. The questioning continued for nearly an hour. Every answer remained calm. Measured. Precise. But the outcome had already been decided. Finally, the legal representative spoke. Pending investigation, your employment is suspended. Silence. The words landed softly. Yet their weight felt immense. After 20 years in the same building, Elias was being escorted out. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because someone powerful wanted him gone. As he walked through the lobby carrying a small cardboard box, dozens of employees watched. Some looked embarrassed. Others confused. A few looked guilty. No one spoke. The squeak of his shoes against the marble echoed through the vast space. The same lobby where he had worked thousands of mornings. The same lobby where most people never noticed him. Now everyone noticed. For the wrong reason. Outside, cold air struck his face. The city moved on. Unconcerned. Indifferent. As cities always do. That evening, Victor received a visitor. His son. Daniel Ashford. Emma's husband. The younger man entered the office without knocking. A rare act. Victor looked up. I assume this is about Carter. Daniel remained standing. It's about Emma. Victor leaned back. Same thing. No. The word came sharply. Victor's eyebrows rose. Daniel rarely challenged him. You humiliated her father. Victor shrugged. He humiliated himself. The younger man's expression hardened. By working? Victor said nothing. Daniel continued. Do you know what everyone is talking about now? Victor folded his hands. The investigation? No. Daniel's voice lowered. The fact that a maintenance supervisor solved a crisis your executives couldn't. The room became very quiet. Victor's eyes narrowed. There are things you don't understand. Then explain them. Victor stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The man is hiding something. Daniel stared at him. And what if he's hiding pain instead of guilt? The question lingered. Victor looked away first. Not because he lacked an answer. Because he disliked the one that came to mind. 3 nights later, Elias finally opened a box he had not touched in years. Dust coated the lid. The cardboard felt fragile with age. Emma sat beside him. The apartment remained silent except for the faint hum of a refrigerator. Inside the box lay pieces of another life. Awards. Photographs. Business journals. Letters. Memories. And regrets. Many regrets. Emma lifted a photograph. Her eyes widened. The man in the image looked familiar. And impossible. Young Elias stood at the center of a corporate leadership summit. Hundreds of executives surrounded him. Reporters. Investors. Government officials. He looked confident. Powerful. Nothing like the maintenance supervisor she knew. You were. Her voice faded. Elias nodded. Yes. The confession felt strangely relieving. Like setting down a weight carried too long. Years earlier, he had helped build one of the largest infrastructure consulting firms in the world. His strategies shaped cities. Governments sought his advice. Corporations competed for his attention. Success arrived quickly. Then tragedy arrived faster. Corporate corruption inside the industry had led to catastrophic consequences. Lives were affected. Families destroyed. Among them was his own. His wife became ill during that period. By the time he realized what truly mattered, he had already sacrificed too much. Power. Status. Recognition. None of it had protected the people he loved. After her death, he walked away. Entirely. He chose Emma. Every single day afterward. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You gave all that up. Elias smiled sadly. No. He looked at her. I chose something better. The room fell silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Meaningful silence. The kind that arrives when a hidden truth finally breathes. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Elias answered. A familiar voice responded. The tone carried both urgency and concern. Mr. Carter, you need to know something. Elias listened. His expression changed immediately. The color drained from Emma's face as she watched. What happened? He lowered the phone slowly. The wind rattled the apartment window. City lights flickered in the darkness beyond. Finally, Elias spoke. Victor isn't investigating me anymore. Emma frowned. What does that mean? Elias looked toward the distant skyline where Ashford Tower stood illuminated against the night. His voice became very quiet. It means he's trying to bury something. And for the first time since this conflict began, Elias realized the danger had never been his past. The danger was what Victor feared the world might discover next. The hearing chamber overlooked the city from the top floor of Ashford Global Headquarters, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline washed clean by the previous night's rain. Morning sunlight spilled across polished wood tables and brushed against rows of leather chairs arranged with careful precision. The room smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and anticipation. Nearly everyone who mattered was present. Board members. Major investors. Corporate attorneys. Senior executives. Financial journalists. And perhaps most importantly, many of the same people who had attended Emma's wedding reception months earlier. The same witnesses. The same audience. The same social hierarchy. Only now the atmosphere felt very different. Because rumors had become investigations. Investigations had become evidence. And evidence had become a threat. Victor Ashford sat at the center of the board table. His expensive suit remained flawless. His posture remained rigid. But the confidence that once seemed inseparable from him had begun to crack. Small signs revealed it. The tightened jaw. The restless fingers. The brief glances toward legal counsel. Across the room, Elias Carter entered quietly. No entourage. No dramatic announcement. No attempt to command attention. He wore a simple dark suit. The same one he had worn at Emma's wedding. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The silence arrived again. Heavy. Meaningful. The kind of silence that recognized a turning point before anyone spoke. Emma sat near the back beside Daniel. Her hands rested tightly together. Years of uncertainty seemed compressed into this single morning. Everything that had been hidden. Everything that had been questioned. Everything that had been used against her father. Today would decide its meaning. The chairperson called the meeting to order. Formal introductions followed. Then legal counsel began presenting findings from an independent investigation initiated after inconsistencies surfaced within several major Ashford Global projects. At first, the presentation felt technical. Dates. Contracts. Financial structures. Regulatory filings. But slowly a pattern emerged. A troubling pattern. Years earlier, several infrastructure acquisitions had been approved using misleading projections. Risk assessments had been altered. Disclosure requirements had been minimized. Critical warnings had disappeared before reaching investors. Millions became billions. And every path led toward the same office. Victor Ashford's. The room grew increasingly still. One board member removed his glasses. Another leaned forward. Several investors exchanged uneasy looks. Victor remained expressionless. Until the next document appeared. Then his composure faltered. Because the evidence no longer came from internal records. It came from someone who understood exactly where to look. Someone who had seen similar corruption decades earlier. Someone who recognized the warning signs long before anyone else. Elias. The chairperson turned toward him. Mr. Carter, would you please explain how you identified these discrepancies? Every eye in the room shifted. Elias stood slowly. Sunlight reflected softly across the conference table. For a brief moment, he looked exactly as he always had. Calm. Ordinary. Unimpressed by power. Then he began speaking. His voice carried no anger. No bitterness. Only clarity. 27 years ago, I helped build infrastructure projects across 3 continents. Murmurs spread through the room. The secret was finally becoming public. I worked with governments, investment groups, and private developers. He paused. At the time, I believed intelligence alone could solve problems. The room listened carefully. Eventually, I learned that intelligence without integrity creates larger disasters. No one interrupted. Not even Victor. Elias continued. Years ago, he explained, he had witnessed corporations manipulating data to secure approval for projects that should never have moved forward. The consequences affected communities, families, workers, people with no voice in executive boardrooms. The experience changed him permanently. Then came personal tragedy. His wife's illness. The realization that success had become a substitute for purpose. And the decision to walk away. Not because he failed. Because he finally understood what mattered. The room listened in complete silence. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not from sadness. From recognition. For the first time, she was seeing the entire man. Not just her father. The whole story. The sacrifices. The choices. The cost. Elias turned toward Victor. His expression remained calm. Years ago, I learned something important. Victor met his gaze. The most dangerous people in business aren't the dishonest ones. Confusion flickered across several faces. Elias continued. They're the people who convince themselves dishonesty is necessary. The sentence landed with extraordinary force. Because everyone understood who it was meant for. Victor's jaw tightened. Finally, he spoke. You think you're better than me? The question sounded smaller than he intended. Elias shook his head. No. The answer arrived immediately. No, Victor. Silence. I simply think every choice eventually asks to be paid for. The room remained motionless. Then the final evidence appeared. A collection of archived communications recovered from independent sources. Documents showing warnings that had been intentionally suppressed. Financial approvals connected directly to Victor. Records proving knowledge. Responsibility. Intent. The defense collapsed almost instantly. Several board members looked stunned. Others looked furious. One investor quietly lowered his head. The outcome became unavoidable. Hours later, formal votes were cast. Victor Ashford was removed from executive control. Regulatory proceedings would follow. Independent oversight would be established. The consequences had finally arrived. Not through revenge. Not through scandal. Through truth. Simple truth. The same truth Victor had spent years believing he could outmaneuver. As attendees slowly left the chamber, many paused beside Elias. Some offered congratulations. Others offered apologies. Several simply shook his hand. A gesture of respect long overdue. Emma approached him last. The room had mostly emptied by then. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. The city shimmered beyond the glass. For a moment either spoke. Then Emma wrapped her arms around him. The embrace lasted several seconds. Longer than usual. Neither seemed eager to let go. You never told me because you wanted me to build my own life. Elias smiled gently. Yes. You could have given me status. I gave you something better. Emma laughed through tears. Stubbornness? A faint smile appeared. Character. She nodded. The answer felt right. Across the room, Daniel approached carrying a document. Elias. He handed it over. Elias glanced at the paper. An offer. A significant one. The board wanted him to help oversee ethical restructuring across the company. A prestigious position. Powerful. Influential. Exactly the kind of role he once held. Daniel smiled. You earned it. Elias studied the document quietly. Then folded it. I'll help. Daniel nodded. And after that? Elias looked toward the city. Toward the countless ordinary lives moving through streets below. The people nobody noticed. The people who quietly kept the world running. A small smile touched his face. After that, I'll decide. The answer seemed perfectly fitting. Because recognition had never been the goal. That evening, as sunlight faded into gold and the city lights slowly awakened below, Elias and Emma stood together near the building entrance. The same place where he had spent years being overlooked. The same place where people walked past without seeing him. Now they saw him. But the remarkable thing was this. He had never needed them to. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Because dignity does not arrive when the world finally recognizes a person's worth. It exists long before that moment, waiting patiently for others to catch up.